Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
How are you all doing this fine day?
Pretty good. Fine.
Enjoying this nice cold rain? Yeah.
You don't have to shovel the rain.
We don't have to shovel rain. This is true. I am grateful for that. So this will be the conclusion of our January series, looking at New Year, New Me. And our last word for the day will be excuses. We all love excuses, right? Does anyone ever have an excuse for things?
Yeah.
Right? Or you get invited somewhere like, oh, I can't. I'm getting a spine replacement that day, right? Or I can't make it because I don't know how to get to your house. And
Jim would always say he doesn't match up his socks.
you have to match up your socks. Yeah, I like that. That's good. Yeah, I have to rearrange my my wigs that day. I won't be in town. Certainly I think that as humans, we're really good at making excuses. It's a way for us to get out of things, to maybe loosen our accountability to things. And I'm reminded of our good friends, the Israelites, who are the foundation and the bearer of the lineage of Jesus and ultimately our faith system that we have today. And so much to learn from their struggles as we see in the Old Testament. We'll be jumping all around today. I don't have a good spot for you to really land. We'll be in Exodus 20 in a little bit, and we'll probably be hanging out in 2 Kings for a little while. If you want to hop to 2 Kings chapter 11, I'll be there for a little while. I won't be doing a lot of direct reading per se, but that'll be where we'll be working around as we work through our passages this morning. But as I think about the Israelites, I love them so much because as I get older, I realize how much the propensity of the activities that I was so quick to judge and be like, how could you possibly do that, As a child, you're like, well, this is the one true God. How could you do anything but give your all to God in all things? He's delivered you from Egypt. We have these plagues, right? But we have to remember, we're reading it kind of in succession, pretty quickly as it's happening. But there is decades and decades and hundreds of years that are happening in the midst of these stories. So it's important that we keep that in mind, that this is not just all happening over a weekend, that they're that fickle, if you will, right? So I think that we can learn a lot from them. And one thing I wanted to look at is one of their main challenges that they had was related to something. There we go.
Very slow.
It's all right. We'll get there. I have faith in us. We're going to be great. Did it. Fantastic. All right. So, looking at the book of Exodus in chapter 20, this is one of our 10 commandments. And it's about the idea of having no graven image before you, right? So let's read it. It says, "You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven, above, or on the earth, beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments." And so I think about this picture, and certainly we have a lot of takeaways here, right? We have the idea of, we have this imagery of actually physically worshiping something other than God, and what ended up happening throughout really the annals of history and especially with the different kings that Israel had, is they would fall to the wayside of their neighboring communities, and they would do what their neighbors did, right? They would set up worship to Baal or other pagan gods of the day, if you will, and they would have incense and they would burn things really as an homage to them because it was culture appropriate for their surrounding area. So they weren't trying to be counterculture; they were trying to just fit in, right? And what a danger that is, right? If we just fit into the world, there lies our problem. And so I want to look at 2 different kings this morning, both of which were really fraught about from really interesting backgrounds and how we came to this point. So first, obviously we have this very clear passage here. And as you read through, especially the book of Kings, there's example of a king not following this specific command. This is really the cardinal sin of the Israelites, is falling to other gods. And that was really what they fell into more than any other. And certainly there's other opportunities for them to have missed the mark. But this is really where it fell heavy on them throughout the theme, especially in the book of Kings and in Chronicles. But there's 2 kings. There's a king, the first king I'll talk about, his name was Joash. and he reigned in the Israel, Judah area from around 835 BC to 796 BC, and he started at age 7. Okay, so Joash started ruling the kingdom of Judah at the age of 7. Now, keep as a perspective, Phoenix is 8. So he would have been an elder or an advisor to him, probably, right? Someone who could have been in that space. So I just want to give you that perspective. And so what was happening during this time is we see there's really always a turnover of one king to another. And what we see here is kind of throughout the history is we have this moment where one kingdom or one ruler is taking over the path of another ruler. Oh my goodness. And sometimes it would fall into the hands of less than savory characters. And that's where we find ourselves here. All right, so this is in the book of 2 Kings, looking at verses 11, 1 through 3 here. And it says that when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she proceeded to destroy the whole royal family. Yikes, right? It gets worse. But Jehoshaphat, the daughter of King Jehoram, rightful heir of the line of Judah, I'll show you a picture in a minute so it makes sense, and sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, son of Ahaziah, Joash, who was an infant at this time, and stole him away from among the royal princes who were about to be murdered. Yikes. She put him and his nurse in a bedroom to hide from Athaliah. So he was not killed, he was spared. He remained hidden with his nurse at the temple of the Lord for 6 years, while Athaliah ruled the land. And this is in 2 Kings 11, 1 through 3. So there's a lot happening here, a lot of names. Difficult to really follow this sordid tale of mystery and drama, right? It's intense. And I wanted to give you a perspective as to who some of these people are. And so we have charts and graphs. Charts and graphs are my favorite, right? It gives us a nice way to visualize things when we can visualize it.
Would it help to turn that or anything?
I don't know, maybe. We don't know. Maybe. Yeah, if you just want to turn it my way a little bit.
Is this what you're going for?
Yeah.
See, I don't know what you're going
Oh, beautiful. Let's see what's happening now. Ooh, I like that. Thank you, Miss Allen. All right, so I wanted to give you a picture of who some of these people are. So Athaliah, she's the daughter of King Ahab and Jezebel. Remember Jezebel and Ahab? Not so great. Remember what happened with Elijah on the Mount Carmel? They went to the top. He was like, if you can make your altar set on fire, yours is the true God, but I'll make mine set on fire. And then ultimately we know that Elijah was able to successfully burn the altar. Well, from that we have a family, right? We have Jezebel and Ahab. They have a couple kids. We have Athaliah. We also have Jehoram. Now Jehoram is actually the rightful heir of Judah, so he was son of Ahab, and he's from the Davidic line, right? So he's the rightful heir. He ends up passing, right? So we have this picture now of Jehoshaphat, who is the daughter of King Jehoram and Ahaziah's sister. So we have this family picture here, and we have this grandson of Athaliah, Joash, who's the son, right? So here's a picture, make it easier. We have Jezebel, Ahab, we have Jehoram, Athaliah, Ahaziah, Jehoshaphat, and Joash. Whew. At any event, so these are the people in this story. So what we have here is sitting on the throne is Athaliah, who is not a rightful heir at all. She's just kind of really a distant, she's on the side. So she's from the family, but she doesn't belong there. Jehoram passed away. It was a really intense military conflict. At any event, we have Joash. So Joash is stowed away for 7 years. And this is where the story picks back up here. So what ends up happening is a little while later, around the age of 7, right? So this is when we find out his ascension to the throne here. Joash and Jehoshaphat is met with a high priest in the temple, like an actual high priest of God, and was he was a good guy, if we want to call him that. And they created this plan. They said, what we're going to do? We're going to work together, and we're going to overthrow Athaliah. Now Athaliah attempted to totally snuff out the Davidic line, and she was this close. Okay, so I want you to keep that picture in mind. We have this entire family lineage was almost gone in an instant. But remember, God remembered his promise that he's going to use the line of David to be a blessing throughout the many nations, not just from Israel, but throughout the world. And so we have this moment where they're working together. We have this high priest, and they're working together with Jehoshaphat. And they're like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to storm the castle. We understand there is a rotation of security guards around the castle, around really the temple, if you will. And they worked it out, and they said, okay, when you switch, you're going to go in here. And they ended up using, and I love this part here, they ended up using, there's a passage here. Okay, so they used actual weapons that belonged to King David. Now, why is that cool? It says, and then he gave the command, and the commanders the spears and shields that belonged to King David, and they were in the temple of the Lord. So this is like this really powerful moment, right? We have like, we're going to defend the Davidic line with the weapons of King David, right? So we have this beautiful picture here, this imagery that's happening, really underscoring this overthrow, right? So we have this picture. And why that's kind of neat here, this is about, those weapons were about 359 years old. Okay, these weren't like, they're just hanging out here from yesterday. No, these are like almost 4 centuries years old. And they're using these to ultimately take over. And so what they ended up doing is, I'll pass through and we'll summarize, but at the very end, what they ended up doing is they were successful. They overthrew Athaliah, they kicked her out, they did away with her, if you will, in the fashion of that time, as you can imagine. And it says, in the 7th year of Jehu, Joash became king and reigned in Jerusalem for 40 years. Jehu was the king of Israel. This is a point of context, and Joash was the king of Judah. For information about the split, see 1st and 2nd Samuel. Thank you. So in any event, we see he reigned in Jerusalem for 40 years, and his mother's name is Zebiah, and she was from Beersheba. Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. This is important. So Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Jehoiada the priest, this was his military cohort. They worked together here. Instructed him. However, so he did really good. However, the high places, however, were not removed. The people continued to offer sacrifices and burn incenses there. So when you see the term or phraseology, high places, it's talking about a temple or an area where there is a designated area for worship to something other than the one true God. So Joash he was this close to really snuffing out the sin, right? He was so close to actually being successful in doing it. And what a story to lead into this moment, right? He had to overthrow his grandmother. I mean, my grandmothers were a bit saucy at times, but they weren't, nothing like that, And so they had this moment, this conquest. They had to work together to use the weapons of King David. And he's like, you know what? I don't want to ruffle too many feathers. It's already been difficult to get here. And pauses. He doesn't go all the way through here. So this is a picture I want us to keep in mind here. Now, around 200 years later, like I said, things happen quick in the Bible. So around 200 years later, we're brought to Josiah. Now, Josiah is fantastic because, again, we have another young king. He was 8 years old, so this would have been Phoenix's peer, okay? When he became king and reigned in Jerusalem 31 years. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and followed the ways of his father David, not turning aside to the right or the left. And in the 8th year of his reign, while he was still young, he began to seek the God of his father David. In his 12th year, so just a little bit older than Clover, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of high places. Asherah poles and idols were all destroyed. Under his direction, the altars of Baals were torn down. He cut to pieces the incense altars that were above them, smashed the Asherah poles and the idols. Those he broke up to pieces and scattered over the graves of those who had sacrificed to them. Brutal, right? This is intense. He burned the bones of the priests on their altars, and so he purged Judah and Jerusalem. Heavy, right? And this is what we're looking for on a Sunday morning. Some really heavy military conquest here, right? And so Josiah, he saw it all the way through, right? He actually did exactly what was instructed to the kingdom of Israel, was to put no other gods before me. So we have this picture now of Joash, who almost did it, right? Had everything going for him, had every reason to see it through, but just didn't quite get it across the finish line. And then we have Josiah. Now, I was just rereading this, obviously this week in preparation for this whole story. There's a lot more details, and it's intense, but it's a fascinating account of how God's people snuffed out evil in their land. And what a series of bravery. And so I was reflecting on this, and I reached out to my cousin, whose son's name is Josiah, and I texted him, and I said, hey, quick question, Josiah, he was baller, right? He was brutal, didn't mess around, he took care of business, right? And it's like, is this why you named Josiah Josiah? He's like, oh yeah, that's why, especially the bone thing. And I was like, okay, all right, that's good to know. And Josiah, he's a little cutie. He's so sweet. He's almost ready to rule Israel. I think he'll be 7 in a little while here. But at any event, we had this picture of this absolute and complete surrender, right? We hear in these songs this morning, we're going to surrender all. What does that look like? Why do we actually surrender all? It doesn't mean surrender some of yourself or surrender part of what you think you ought to get rid of. It's a full extinguishing of the fire, right? What happens if you put a fire 50% out and there's still fuel around? What happens? Eventually it's going to stir back up and become just as destructive, if not more, than it was previously. And so as we look through this here, we have this beautiful picture. We're very excited. Now the very next king after him was Jehoiakim. Now Jehoiakim, bless his heart, he was the last king of Judah. He actually turned back to sin, started worshiping idols, and then what does God do? He allows the Babylonians to totally consume them, and that's where they ended up leaving in exile for the next 650 years or so, because ultimately God had enough. He said, okay, you've had chance after chance after chance, and finally, I'm going to give you exactly what you want. You like the other nations so much, I'm going to let the other nations consume you, and you'll be just like them. Yikes, right? That's an intense series of events, but that's ultimately what happens. And so we have this picture, this hope that we see in Josiah, and just so quickly behind it, we see this, right? So we think about the Israelites, right? And we're thinking about, man, how could you turn back to your old ways? You just were totally clean, or you were totally free from all. Why did you go back, right? And we know that ultimately, we know God had a plan. He had a rescue plan in place. His name was Jesus. We learn all about Jesus, and we talk about him. He was the rescue plan because we knew that humans were incapable of following the full letter of the law. They just couldn't do it. As much as they tried, and as much as God tried to reveal himself to them in ways that would be so uncanny and so unique, delivering them and performing miracles, delivering them from the desert, right? And yet, God knew that people have a short-term memory, and they don't remember, oh yeah, this happened 2 or 3 generations ago. We think about things like this. This was 200 years later, and we have this beautiful moment of recovery. We have already forgotten things that our grandparents and our great-grandparents' generations have learned, right? We're not that far removed from that sort of scenario. What can we learn from those situations? So I asked the question, do we ever find ourselves worshiping idols? And you might think, well, no, I don't have any golden calves in my kitchen, right? And that's great. I'm happy for you. That's a great first step. You don't have any golden calves in your kitchen. But maybe we try to compensate by trying to do a lot of good things, right? And to try to even the scale, so to speak. If I can create an image that's so polished and reformed here, I don't have to give account to this other thing that's really weighing me back, that's holding me down. And so what God wants us to do is to release those things that are holding us back, because we're only this far away from actually not fully surrendering if we start hanging on to these lower things, right? Or maybe a series of things, right? So you might do things like open the door for someone, right? And that's great. Or maybe you attend church. Congrats, we're glad you're here. That's a right decision, But you can't seem to substitute the importance of Netflix or the 24-hour news cycle long enough to spend a few minutes alone with God in prayer outside of Sunday, right, looking at the teaching of His Word, right? Or maybe you can't let go of the awful things somebody said to you, right? 10, 15 years ago. You're still holding on. You can recall it as if it were yesterday. That ironclad memory. It's a treacherous thing, right? And you've already agreed in your mind that they're not worthy of forgiveness, so you've already rested in your heart. They're not going to be forgiven as long as I have breath in my lungs. And maybe you're right. Maybe they don't deserve it, right? But we also know that all have sinned and all have fallen short of the glory of God. And I love that caveat in Romans 3:23, where it doesn't specify all have sinned except for you, right? No, it's all. It's clear. It's total. It's a full immersion. Everybody's impacted by it.
Well, except for Jesus. Jesus never sinned.
He's other. He's not all. Or maybe you owe somebody money from a long time ago, for instance, right? And you're just hoping that they'll forget instead of doing the Christ-like thing, right? Which says in Romans 13:8, it says, "Let no debt remain outstanding except the debt to love one another. For whoever loves others has fulfilled the law," right? Maybe we have that in our life, right? I think of family members or people in the past or just friends I've talked to. They're like, "Yeah, I owe somebody like $600. I'll pay him eventually." But you can't rest. You can't go to sleep knowing that there's this looming debt that you have outstanding, right? That's why God says not to owe no man money, right? Because He's trying to give you that freedom, not because He's trying to, be your financial advisor. Although Jesus is a fantastic financial advisor, He's trying to give you the freedom that comes from that. He's trying to release you from the bondages of those past commitments, and I love that. The only continuing debt we should carry as Christians is the debt to love one another. Right? For whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. And we know that because of Jesus' command, that His new commandment is to love one another. And so we think through these things here, and we reflect on how is God using us in these spaces here. And I think about what Paul said to the Thessalonians here. This was a growing and a maturing church here. And this element of encouragement was really spot on for them because he was lauding them. He was saying, "Great job, you've done the right thing." He says, "For they themselves report what kind of reception you gave us." And he's talking about those who were acting on their behalf. And Paul's giving a report here. He says, "They tell us how you turned to God from idols to serve the living and true God, and to wait for His Son from heaven, whom He raised from the dead, Jesus, who rescues us from the coming wrath." So as we reflect on that, we think that is our hope. Our hope is in Christ Jesus, knowing that of all of the sin that has been accounted for in history past, and all of the sin that's presently going on today, and any sin that will go on in now future, Jesus has paid for, right? He paid for it by the ultimate sacrifice, by giving of His life, because He knew that none of us could ever measure up on the scales of our own systems of good and bad. He knew that we wouldn't have the ability to do that. So what I want us to think about is just a couple questions this week that we can take away from us, right? So first question is for us is, what destructive pattern remains a stumbling block for us? That's a tough question. Like if you really think about this, what's a stumbling block that I have in my life? And maybe it's, for you, maybe I'll just pick on traffic for a minute because I was stuck on the corner here for about 6 solid minutes, no exaggeration, just waiting for the arrow to turn green. Didn't turn green. And it could have been very easy for me to turn to wrath or frustration or anger. But I just says, you know what? And my daughter, in her infinite wisdom, says, well, maybe we're being protected from something. I said, you're right. Maybe we are. We don't know. And so we just rest easy. And so maybe it's something more sinister that has a hold on you. A series of thoughts or a series of activities that people don't know about in your life. Only you know about it. You think nobody else could possibly know, right? God knows, 1,000%. And that thing, that pattern, that behavior, that's the idol that's still being worshipped. That's the thing that's still being given a high place in your life because it still allows time in your life. The next question would be, what have I displayed in my life that in the surface is fine? I love this question. So this is really thinking about the idea is that, it's easy for us to put on a front. Everything's fine, we're doing great, we're doing great, no problems here, right? Or my least favorite and easily the highest red flag for me is when someone says, oh, I'm living the dream. That's like alarm bells for me. I'm like, wait a minute, let's back up. Something's not okay, right? People don't often say that in good spirit. Some people are sincere. I haven't met them yet, but I'm sure someone is living out their dream. But this persona, this perception, and it's easy for us, especially in today's day and age, we can create a persona on the internet that says everything's fine, I'm so blessed, everything's great, but in your heart you wrestle with anger, or you wrestle with addiction, or you wrestle with frustration, and you can't let go of things. And so it's thinking about the things that, are we overcompensating, trying to do enough good things so that God won't notice these other smaller things that have a hold of us? Again, I'll point you back to the fire. If you don't snuff it all the way out, it's going to rekindle. It's the nature of fire. As a matter of fact, there was one time, fun story, my father and I would clean up our woods often. There was a storm back in 1999, I think it was. Maybe it was 2000. It was a while ago. It was a pretty intense storm came through the area. My parents had a property that they owned. It knocked down a ton of mature, beautiful trees. And we went back there and we assessed it, and we came to the conclusion. We said, well, this is probably going to take about 5 years to clean. And that was no exaggeration. It took us about 5 years to clean every weekend and over the summer, going there and spending time burning brush, cutting wood. Unfortunately, we burned wood as a family, so we could put all that wood to use, and so we were able to get it back to its original clean splendor. But during that time, we would always burn brush, right? Well, on one specific occasion, we were burning some brush, and we had gone back the next day, so we burned brush all day. We went back the next day to burn some brush, and it snowed. We had like a good 2-3 inches of snow. And we started putting more branches over the pile from yesterday, because there's snow. It's just, we'll start a new fire here today, not a big deal. We're putting on sticks, and we would often use, from time to time, an accelerant to assist or aid in the creation of the fire, especially with, you got a foot of snow, you need to be able to have some things. And so my dad, he was pouring some gas on the area where we had the fire from yesterday, and within a few moments he was fully engulfed in flames. Apparently, I reacted incredibly poorly. This is me. And my brother, out of nowhere, flies out from behind a tree and tackles him and takes his coat off. And a testament to Carhartt, he was fine. He was in good shape. Obviously, we always kind of joke about that day for various reasons. But the long and short of it was, underneath the surface, underneath the snow, this layer which seemed to be fine and totally insulated, beneath it all there was this ember that still remained hot. So hot that even the smallest accelerant was able to rekindle it, just like that. So it's important that we try to truly fully extinguish the things in our life that are burning at us, that are taking away from our ability to move forward in our faith. Next question. What has our attention, time, and energy? I'll let you guys think about this one, right? This can be anything. And it has our attention that operates outside of the context of your faith walk, right? What is consuming your time? What's consuming your energy? And what has our attention? And so for us, it might be like, every night you're like, I'm just going to watch, I'm just going to turn the news for a few minutes, just maybe catch the sports and the weather. 4 hours later, it's like, 11 o'clock. What just happened? I just lost my entire evening. I guess it's time for bed. I'm going to go to bed, wake up in the morning, have some coffee. I'm going to turn the news on real quick, see what the weather's like, see what the sports are. You turn it on, all of a sudden it's 10 o'clock. What just happened? I just lost another 4 hours, right? It sneaks up on us. These habits, these patterns that we have in our life, that in and of themselves are not necessarily nefarious, right? They're not a sin in and of itself. But watching the news does not make you a bad person. But it's the lack of discipline about the things in our life that consume our time that become problematic. The more you watch news, do you feel better or worse? Right. I seldom watch the news, but man, I'm so glad I watch these 11 devastating stories one after another. I feel, no one's walking away from that feeling encouraged, right? Depending on what news you're watching. So the next one would be, maybe we're tired of waiting for something better to happen by comparing our lives to others, right? Comparison, that's the idol of comparison. This is yucky, and it's in everything, right? It's fraught upon you from marketing. You watch any single advertisement, any commercial, they're like, you deserve it, you need this, posturing it in such a way that what you currently have isn't good enough and that you deserve more, right? So it's this sinister way to really get your attention and think that, maybe I do need a limousine to take me to work. Maybe that's not the ad. Or maybe it's, this brand new appliance from Home Depot. Well, it's on sale. And to be fair, my appliance is a good 2 years old. I can't, throwing it out, You see all the time if you're ever on like a free board in your community, whether it's, Williamsville free board or it's, Clarence free board, people are like, oh, I'm giving away this washer and dryer because we just got a new set today. It matches better with the kitchen. What? Right? And that's wonderful that people can benefit from that. I think that's awesome. I love that I love the giving aspect of it, but the idea that you are replacing it because it didn't match. So it's the idea that we're not ever having enough, that we're never good enough. And all you have to do is look at your friend's stuff, right? Or talk to your neighbors, or like, man, that's a really nice snow. Is that an Aaron's? Is that an XL 2400? That's a beaut. Very easy And I was very excited about that. I love my neighbors. They're very kind and let me use theirs from time to time because mine got caught on fire. Different stories. Last question for us this week would be, what excuse are we giving ourselves to justify a behavior? Right? So we think about Joash, right? What did he do? He actually was super impactful. He actually raised funds, and he was able to help rebuild the temple. He created like this chest. It was like this steel thing. He poked a hole in it, and he created this Joash chest that was to be used above and beyond giving. So people would use that as an offering to be like, we're going to help rebuild the temple. So there was this real spirit of gratitude. Like, good things were happening when Joash was in charge, right? But what did he fail to do, right? He failed to see it all the way through. He failed to fully rid the nation of these other hot embers that were just waiting to rekindle, right? So we think about that. And so that would be our last question for today. So as we think through this, we think about this, the primary disobedience that the Israelites face is no different than the primary disobedience we have. We say we serve God, but the sacrifice of our time, energy, resources, and false gods. God does not want half of us. He does not want 3/4 of us. And He doesn't want 84% of us. He wants all of us. It is going to mean letting go of the old you to be done with, and the new you, full of life and energized in the hope that is given in Christ Jesus. So when we surrender all, you're not fully emptying yourself and then being backfilled with nothing. You're not, I've given you everything, now I'm empty. Quite the opposite. You're releasing everything so for once you can be full of what you're supposed to be full of, and that's Christ and His love. You can't operate at that level if you're still holding on to the lies and the things of this world that offer promises that will never be filled. So our last thought for today would be this verse here in Romans. It says, since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. And I use that as an encouragement for all of us when we think about the age-old question, well, what if I live in a remote land and I never could hear about God or anything like that? This verse here points to it. It's like, since the beginning of the creation of the world, His invisible qualities are clearly seen, so that people are without excuse. Because if we really look around and examine the natural world around us, we're left with no excuse but to point to something divine, something intentional, moving this forward and actually creating this here. So hopefully that's our encouragement, that we would be without excuse both in our own personal walk, but also to encourage others to initiate a walk with Jesus. So let's go ahead and finish in prayer. Father, we thank You so much this morning for Your word and for Your guidance over these difficult and necessary subjects that Your word is full of, that we can glean from and grow from. I pray that You would etch it in our hearts in a way that would provide new meaning, new understanding, and that we would be convicted to release things that are holding us back, things that are preventing us from that true and pure, unadulterated intimacy with You, Lord. I pray that You would just watch over us, give us that clarity, give us that prompting, and let Your Spirit be the guider of our hearts and of our conscience, and that You would be receptive to that in our lives, that You would just watch over us and use us fully in all that we do and all that we say. And I just pray that You go before us this week and keep us safe and help us to be an encouragement to those around us. And we're just so thankful for this community here, Lord. I pray that You bless each of the people here this morning. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.